全球聊天室独家专访莫德纳副总裁 Patrick Bergstedt， 畅谈他的最新计划。阿兹海默症新药的实验数据出炉，能够有效改善患者失智的状况，但是脑出血的风险完全没有办法忽视。欢迎收看全球聊天室，我是 Gino 王显瑜。户外口罩令，我们知道从12月开始就已经松绑了，所以现在我们大家在户外当然还是可以，但是已经没有必要戴口罩了。这当然是好消息，因为可以大口呼吸新鲜空气。不过，毕竟其实再过几个礼拜，再过几天就是耶诞节跟跨年了，到时候一定又会是人挤人，这会不会害我们的防疫出现破口呢？我们请教了医师，但医师说其实不用太紧张，一般民众真的不用担心，只有年长者跟小孩这些脆弱族群要特别注意。另外，同时呢，施打站也涌入了次世代疫苗的施打潮。
补打次世代疫苗接种站再现人潮，因应12月管制再松绑，户外不用再强制戴口罩，疫苗防护显得更重要。
是请假来的，没错，就是怕说学校那边就是施打，就是进度可能会稍微就是慢一点点，然后所以才想说自己先带来，就是特约院所这边先来。
我会担心，因为一直都是每天虽然1万多，可是我想会黑数很多。那我们比较年长了嘛，还是要保护自己。
从耶诞到跨年等各项大型活动接力登场，农历春节返乡人潮南北移动，加上海外返乡侨民，尤其是从疫情仍然严峻的中国入境台商，再在考验台湾下一步防疫工作。
开打第一天非常的踊跃，一个早上就有700-800人。接下来脱口罩，当然风险是会比较上升一点。对，加上过年就是南来北往，对，所以还是就是呼吁大家，如果就是 OK 的话，时间到就可以过来施打疫苗。
但是之后还是会有一波疫情而且时间点大概是1月6号，所以对台湾一般大众是不会有太大的一个威胁，但是对于那些脆弱族群的话，每一波疫情都仍然会是一个威胁啦。
预先做好防护不能少，不过流行病学专家何美香也认为，台湾疫情走在中国前面，不用太担忧，更建议政府可将新冠肺炎改成第4类法定传染病，并积极研发儿童专用新冠疫苗，定期公布全国血清调查、死因分析报告，相关资讯都得公开透明，因为当下波疫情来时，才能参考这些统计数据，不让后续防疫规划乱了手脚。镜新闻刘佩婷、洪伟涛采访报道。
新冠肺炎这个病毒之所以会被世卫组织命名为 COVID-19， 是因为它是在2019年年末发现的。那所以我们如果数一数，2020、2021、2022这波疫情从中国湖北武汉爆发之后呢，它一步一步蚕食鲸吞全世界，到现在已经差不多3年了。那很幸运的是，现在人类已经找到了跟疫情、跟病毒共存的方式。我们可以在餐厅里面吃饭，我们可以脱口罩逛大街了。这一切有极大部分要归功于疫苗 vaccine。那我们刚刚在影片当中也有看到说，次世代疫苗开打了，那打气看起来是蛮不错的，也很踊跃。那今天全球聊天室很荣幸的为您独家邀请到莫德纳的全球资深副总裁 Patrick Bergstedt 来跟大家聊一聊，经过这一场3年大疫，药厂在其中有哪些拼搏，有哪些努力，有哪些不为人知的困难与挑战。So, Mr. Bergstedt, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with you, and I appreciate you inviting me to join your show.
When we were in the makeup room, you told me that this is one of the first times you were actually in a professional TV studio setting.
Absolutely.
Is it overwhelming?
It is overwhelming.
to be sitting in front of, well, it looks like we have videos and pictures behind us, but this really is just a giant green screen.
So it's a bit overwhelming, it's a bit intimidating, but I'll do my best.
You'll be perfect. The first question I want to put to you is, we know that as it was known then, the novel coronavirus first spread around the world, different countries reacted differently. Well, here in Taiwan, we were sort of lucky in the sense that we caught wind of this SARS-like disease well in advance, and we took precautions early, including setting up an epidemic command center in January 2020 and sending charter flights to bring back Taiwanese expats in China. I'm just wondering, where were you? Because we were kind of like the early responders in a sense. Where were you when you realized that this virus was real?
So I live in the United States.
Right.
And from January of 2020,
right,
I was working from home in a tiny little office.
You were working from home before the pandemic?
Before the pandemic,
right,
working from home. Schools had already been closed in certain parts of the United States. My daughter was working on a computer doing schoolwork from home, and our offices had been closed. So the first quarter of 2020, life in the United States had already changed very, very significantly. In April, I received a call from the CEO of Moderna saying, listen, we would like you to join us. And he said, because we believe that we have a technology that can help address the world by developing a new novel vaccine. And I said, very candidly, I said, well, I cannot start today because I'm still working
right,
for a previous company.
I can just support the ship and be like, no.
But I joined Moderna officially in June, 1st of June, 2020. And at that point in time, we had the early clinical data. So we knew that the vaccine that Moderna had made was producing a very high level of immune response. And that is the first indicator that this vaccine could be effective in protecting populations all around the world. So that was in April, May of 2020, what we knew that we had something. But we had not yet started the large clinical development program.
That, before, because Moderna is pretty much a household name now. Hey, did you get your vaccine? Yeah, I got Moderna. What did you have? Oh, I have Johnson & Johnson. You guys are like, there's not, I would be surprised if someone doesn't know the name Moderna right now. But back then in 2020, it wasn't famous. Essentially, the vaccine put Moderna on the map.
Gino, it's a very important distinction that you're making, because Moderna is not a new company. mRNA science is not new.
Right.
Moderna has been in this field for 12 years. So, in a way, mRNA, which is the focus of our platform, is in the name of the company, right? It's Moderna.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's clever. All right, sorry, go on.
It's all that we do. Right? It's all that we do. We only do mRNA science.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. Before 2020, we had done a number of experiments in a number of different disease areas. The lead program was not COVID.
Of course, right.
The lead program was actually a different virus called cytomegalovirus, which causes birth defects in children. And that was the most advanced clinical program at that point in time. But when COVID happened and we knew that we had a signal that showed that this vaccine could protect, that changed everything.
There's a smorgasbord, if you will, of vaccines on the market right now. We have Moderna, mRNA, we have AstraZeneca, we have BioNTech, we have Johnson & Johnson, which is a little less effective. But that aside, some of these use mRNA technology, some of these are what's called protein subunit vaccines or viral vector vaccines. Correct. Now we have the next generation bivalent vaccine by Moderna, and in full disclosure, I literally just got my second booster, less than 24 hours ago, yesterday morning. Can you give us a bit of a refresher on how these vaccines are different?
Sure. So you have what is called, many of those vaccines that you mentioned, the viral vector subunit vaccines, those are sort of like traditional vaccines, where you take a piece of the virus,
right.
You either inactivate it, or some vaccines also have actually live virus.
Right.
Right? But that is 100-year-old technology, right? And most of the vaccines that are available have been made through that traditional method of growing viruses, because that's actually what you do. You grow the virus,
of course,
and then you inactivate it, or you actually take a snippet of that virus. You use that in a vaccine to trigger the body's immune response. Right? mRNA is very, very, very different, because what you have to remember that mRNA is an informational molecule. So what we are doing is we're using the body's natural immune system. So as you and I are sitting here, our body is producing antibodies because that's how we protect ourselves and keep healthy.
Of course.
What we do is we give you the code. We give you the codes. We sort of like jump start the sequence here by giving your body the instructions to make the antibodies, make the protein against the CoV-2 virus, which is what causes COVID-19, right? So this is revolutionary because what we are doing is we're using the body's natural immune response, but we're just giving you the instructions to be able to make the protein targeted against that specific virus. What's very important is the speed with which we are able to do that. So coming back to what you mentioned, the prototype, the original virus, the COVID-2 virus, the Wuhan strain, that sequence was presented on the internet very, very early in January of 2020. It took Moderna 42 days from the time that sequence was made available on the internet to make the first vaccine for in-human study. 42 days.
That's remarkably fast, because when I was listening to news stories, and experts and pundits were saying like, oh, it could take years to develop a vaccine, and you're saying 42 days.
Because correct, traditional vaccines, that is what it usually does. So with mRNA, you are able to go much faster, much more pointed, much more targeted. And then also recently, you mentioned you've received your latest booster, and Taiwan is actually one of the first countries in Asia to have received the first bivalent vaccine, which was targeted at the BA.1 Omicron strain. And then very recently, the Taiwan FDA very rapidly approved the BA.4/5 booster vaccine.
Right.
First country again in Asia to have that. We were able to rapidly update that vaccine. It took us about 60 days to update the vaccine from the BA.1 to the BA.4/5. So this is the power of mRNA platform technology versus the original method of vaccine. In a way, you can think about it like your smartphone, which is sitting right next to you. The company sends you updates regularly, right? We will be able to provide updated vaccines on a routine basis. So in Taiwan, the vaccine that will be deployed will always be the most up-to-date, the most relevant to provide people with the broadest protection possible.
If that's what Moderna did in response to the vaccine, you're talking about in 42 days, there was the first vaccine ready for trial?
Correct.
For clinical trial?
Correct.
Do you know what other pharmaceutical companies were doing at the time?
Look, I think that everybody was trying extremely hard.
Of course.
Globally, there have historically been about 4 major global vaccine manufacturers. Unfortunately, all 4 of those manufacturers, their programs failed. Their own in-house programs failed using traditional ways of developing vaccines.
Failure meaning it didn't produce a proper response.
Their vaccines against the COVID-2 virus failed. It didn't produce the right immune response,
right.
Or from a safety and tolerability perspective, it was not acceptable. Mm-hmm. The companies that actually came forward to produce the first vaccines that were deployed for the world, many of them were non-traditional vaccine manufacturers using different technologies.
Of course. Was Moderna kind of punching above its weight when you guys tried to develop the vaccine for COVID? It sounded ambitious.
Oh, absolutely ambitious, absolutely bold, absolutely risky. But the company is founded upon a premise that if mRNA works in one disease area, the chances of it working in many, many other disease areas is great.
It carries.
And because, once again, you're taking the gene sequence and you're targeting the very specific virus that's causing that disease. It could be influenza, it could be RSV. Right? It could be different diseases. So today we have 48 different clinical development programs, all based upon the mRNA technology, that could either be preventing disease or treating disease in the future.
In the minute that we have before we have to go to break, what was your reaction when you realized, when you and your friends, your team realized that, oh my God, our vaccine works?
Oh, there was such joy. There were scientists and manufacturing people who used to sleep on the floor overnight, trying to get this right. The company
was a very trying time.
The company was incredibly driven, and the company is still driven today. So what rewards us is seeing a healthier world. And I'll sort of close by saying what has been so rewarding being in Taiwan over the last couple of days. It's like people stopping me and saying, thank you.
Of course. I wanted to say that to you too. Thank you for giving me that shot. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, that was the message.
Right.
It's just, it's humbling, but at the same time, I feel very proud to have played a small contribution.
As it should be. 休息一下，我们待会回来继续会跟 Patrick Bergstedt 来聊聊，要请教他 COVID 如何改变了、重塑了全球的制药产业，以及 Moderna 跟台湾接下来的缘分、接下来的渊源。马上回来。好，回到全球聊天室，医药大厂 Moderna 布局全球。那在亚太地区这边，我们台湾是继日本、韩国还有澳洲之后，莫德纳第4个设立的海外分公司的据点。那前卫福部长陈时中他曾经说，台湾的疫苗开发技术缺的就是 mRNA 技术。现在呢 mRNA 要来了，产官学界都非常的乐观看待。
国际科技生医大厂在国家新创奖平台同台而坐，没曝光的其实是莫德纳全球副总 Patrick 现身台湾，还说要加强合作，提供 mRNA 平台给台湾学研界共同合作开发。莫德纳疫苗在台代工自产自销有谱了吗？国卫院间接证实。
我们最近就是在跟莫德纳要谈这些详细的细节。
莫德纳布局全球，看中台湾，早就不断释出讯息。先是亚太地区设立分公司，继日本、韩国和澳洲，台湾是第4国。全球副总如今又亲自来台湾，要借重台湾坚强设计实力，不言而喻。但前卫副部长陈时中曾说，比起走上韩国、日本在分装填充上代工，台湾更应布局前端技术，尤其 mRNA 技术正是当前台湾所缺。
莫德纳 BNT 都有这样的一些相关的计划在，我们都乐观其成哈。相对的 mRNA 的技术，两家公司都是很先进。那如果把前端的技术带进来，跟我们这相关的科技业来结合，我相信是一件非常好的事情。
mRNA 技术有望在台湾落地，补足台湾疫苗技术缺口。莫德纳喊出2025年发展出15种对抗致命病原菌的疫苗，包括流感疫苗、HIV、癌症疫苗、新冠组合疫苗，期待在台湾找到合作伙伴。况且 mRNA 技术不只能用在疫苗、癌症药、罕病药、代谢病用药也能用。国卫院本就双管齐下，一面设立 mRNA 疫苗技术平台，一面积极向国外争取授权。
台湾还是要发展自己在 messenger RNA 疫苗或相关药物的自己的研发的能量。我们从很上游的地方，国家卫生研究院来做这些开发的工作。那中游跟下游我们会转给国内的业界跟厂商。那这些过程都需要国际的合作。
如果真的能够在台湾有这样的一个工厂的话呢，它一定会有很多的外溢效果，所以对我们整体的一个生技产业mRNA 的一个疫苗的一个技术呢，一定会有所的一个提升。
产官学界乐观看待台湾有机会在疫苗技术上升级，甚至卡位未来疫苗药物跟欧美零时差。经新闻联播新闻记者江建中采访报道。
We know that Moderna has teamed up with South Korea's Samsung to mass produce vaccines and is also considering building a factory in Japan to manufacture vaccines. In fact, a report by Nikkei Asia says that Moderna CEO Stefan Bancel said construction would start if the Japanese government signs a 10-year deal, during which time it would be obligated to buy vaccines. So I understand that Moderna also has established a subsidiary office in Taiwan at the end of September. Can you tell us more about this partnership, if you will?
Sure. So maybe just a little bit of introduction to your question. Taiwan in 2020 was in a desperate situation because of the pandemic. Desperate situation to receive vaccines to protect its people. And I started having conversations with authorities in Taiwan towards the latter part of 2020, towards the end of 2020. And as everybody knows, it was thanks to a collaboration between the American administration, Taiwan administration, that those first doses were actually able to be received in Taiwan as a donation. And then very soon after that, Moderna was able to enter into a supply agreement with the Taiwan CDC as well as the MOH in order to have vaccines flow into Taiwan over the last 2 years. And we highly appreciate the collaboration and the partnership and the contribution that we've been able to make. The reason for my visit is actually to pursue and advance those conversations in terms of how do we take the relationship between Moderna from something that was is a supply agreement of vaccine into something a lot bigger and a lot broader. And so, Gina, when we took the decision earlier this year to expand into a number of the Southeast Asian countries, we could have gone to many different countries, but we had some very specific criteria around
what are those?
Which were those countries, right? We wanted to, firstly, and this is not necessarily in the order of importance, but they're important in terms of your listenership and viewership to understand. A country that respects scientific innovation, a country that respects that intellectual property, a country that within itself has great industries that are pioneering and trying out and creating incubation for scientific innovation.
I can already think of countries that I'll be crossing out just given those three criteria. But go on.
Economically stable, talent, right? Taiwan has a history of being a country where firstly, it's an excellent healthcare system. It has excellent university infrastructure. Excellent scientific researchers and clinicians. So we wanted to be part of Taiwan for many of those reasons. Our office that we've established now under the leadership of Joyce Lee, who's leading as general manager, is sort of like putting this first flag of Moderna into Taiwan and saying, well, okay, how do we create a coalition of partnerships here? Because vaccines it's a very, very strange business, all right? You can have vaccine, but that doesn't necessarily mean that vaccine gets into your arms, right? You need a good healthcare provider service, right? You need good supply chain and logistics. So there are many, many factors that make sure that a vaccine gets into your arm. But more importantly, this is a data-rich country, right? Because of the way the healthcare infrastructure works, all of the data rolls up into the MOHW and the Taiwan FDA and the CDC. So here's an opportunity also to work together in terms of understanding the safety, the tolerability, how is the vaccine performing under real-world conditions in Taiwan? Yes, we have lots of data from the United States, but what people in Taiwan want to know is the vaccine effective? Is the vaccine safe? Right, in Taiwanese people. So we welcome the opportunity to carry on this conversation and saying, listen, okay, let's look at this vaccine over time. But more importantly, we are not just a COVID-19 company. We actually are conducting clinical trials for our influenza vaccine here in Taiwan.
This is hard for me to fathom because when I think of Moderna, I think of COVID. But you are not just a COVID-19 company. That's right.
Correct.
Exactly. Go on.
And the RSV vaccine is also going to be clinical trials are also going to be also being done here in Taiwan. So, in addition to that, as part of my visit, I've also gone to meet with leaders who are creating these incubators of scientific research, because we want to be part of that group of people as well. I'm also talking to people who are leaders in the contract manufacturing organization. So my discussion over the last couple of days here in Taiwan is to really firstly understand, I haven't been here for a long time, understand what is going on, learn, but then I don't want to have this is Moderna, this is what we want to do. I want to firstly understand, what do people need? What do people want to do with Moderna moving forward? It's a long-winded answer, I'm sorry.
No, but that's awesome. Because Moderna definitely has the power to be like, hey, we're Moderna, why don't you do what we want you to do? But apparently that's not that's not the stance we're taking.
That's not our approach.
Right.
So really my focus has been to listen and understand first.
What so and I hear that you are doing some of these outreach efforts, which is great. Are there any projects, plans that you could share with us that are ongoing right now?
Sure. Something that I've been speaking a lot about is a program, an initiative, called mRNA Access. mRNA Access is a way for scientists in Taiwan to use our platform in their laboratories to explore and advance the science of mRNA in a specific area of their interest. It may, for example, be a disease, or it may be a virus that's specifically particular to Taiwan. Mm-hmm. It's like an open source kind of way of working, right? So we give them access to our platform.
Here's our code, take it in.
What they do is they say, listen, I want to develop a vaccine against pick the virus. We will make the vaccine for them in the United States. We give the vaccine back to them and allow them to continue studying and understanding the efficacy, the safety, the tolerability of the vaccine at a laboratory scale. So this is something we've been talking about to a number of people here in Taiwan, and we hope that we can really get some momentum around that.
You're talking about perhaps virus or disease that's maybe not unique to Taiwan, but that's of our top concerns.
Sure.
Dengue fever being one of those.
Yes.
Is there any work being done on that in that regard?
That could be. I've heard that a number of times, and obviously it's a real problem in Southeast Asia.
Right.
So that could absolutely be a target, an example of a target where we could work together on.
And what's some of the short-term and long-term goals of the Taiwanese office here?
So a number of things, right? So firstly, we want to ensure that the supply of vaccine continues to flow into Taiwan in order to protect as many people as possible, protect the population, right? So that's point number one. Secondly, we have also recruited a medical director. Many of the things I've just spoken about will be Dr. Jinping Wang. He will be our medical director, working very, very closely with our general manager, Joyce Lee, and together they will establish the collaborations with academic centers moving forward. So the relationship with Minister of Health and Welfare, as well as the Taiwan FDA, as well as the Taiwan CDC, these are critical relationships to ensure that the vaccine is made available as broadly as possible, and that we continue studying the vaccine moving forward.
It delights me to know that Moderna is doing so much to try and deepen it. I guess its ties with Taiwan's public sector and perhaps private sector too.
Yes.
And that's just good news. Thank you. We also talked about COVID-19 being a total game changer, and that's definitely not an overstatement. What types of changes or inspirations even has this pandemic brought to the pharmaceutical industry?
So much has changed. What we have been through, what we continue to go through, because I think the reality is that COVID-19 is not completely over. And I think,
will it ever be?
So that's a whole different discussion, and we can get into that, right? Because the virus that's circulating today is not the same virus that started the pandemic.
That was Alpha, and now we got Omicron.
2 years ago, right? So I think we are going to need to adjust and adapt and probably live with COVID-19 like we live with influenza, right? Mm-hmm. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But so much of what happened was unprecedented, right? In terms of the impact that this infection and disease had on society. Just think about how it disrupted lives. The fact that you and I can have this conversation without a mask, right, is thanks to vaccination, right? I don't need to tell Taiwan about the impact of this on the semiconductor industry, right, and other supply chains, shipping industry, getting on a cruise.
Tourism, exactly.
Right? So lives changed dramatically, but also in terms of the healthcare industry, it required a great deal of partnership with regulators because there was a huge urgency to develop these vaccines at speed without compromising efficacy, safety, and tolerability. So how do you bring that vaccine forward quickly? And we had to work in great partnership with the regulator, with the Taiwan FDA, to say, listen, okay, we're going to bring this vaccine forward without compromising on standards, but we need some help in order to make the vaccine early. So supply chain, right? How do you develop a supply chain for vaccines which have to be stored at minus 20 degrees or even colder in order to be transported? Those kinds of supply chains never existed before the COVID-19 vaccine.
That's when I first realized there's a term called cold chain. I think that's what it's called, right?
That's correct.
If we talk, I guess, even bigger picture, how has COVID-19, which is arguably probably the worst and most serious pandemic in modern history, how has this pandemic affected globalization with regards to the medical industry at large?
So I think there are a number of things that we have learned, but there are also some harsh lessons that we have learned as well, particularly when it came to supply chain constraints. And let me give you an example. I mentioned earlier that there were 4 traditional vaccine manufacturers, right? With the COVID-19 pandemic, you had 100 companies emerge trying to develop vaccines to address this pandemic in the world, right? 100 companies came step forward. But the companies making raw material, for example.
Which, like what?
The active drug substance. That did not increase by the same volume of companies that entered to try to
Nobody
develop.
cared about them at the time.
Correct. The number of companies making glass vials or syringes did not increase with the same volume of companies that were trying to develop. So for example, while there were many companies trying to make vaccine, the interdependency on other industries that supply the vaccine industry did not grow exponentially to meet that kind of demand.
That's what we learned.
So
That
gives you an example of how things changed and how things were disrupted as a result of the pandemic. Once again, there were so many industries here in Taiwan that were affected.
And across the globe too, right.
So I think that as a result of the pandemic, what has emerged is this concept of health security, either at a national government level, but also at an industry level. So if you are a CEO of a key industry and you realize that, listen, COVID and infections and hospitalization really affected the productivity of my workforce, you're probably now thinking about, well, how do I think about vaccination as a response to help ensure that my workforce is well protected from this current infection and also potentially future infections in the future. So governments have thought of, or they have in the past, but what the urgency has been thinking about vaccines nearly as part of national security, health security, like they think about the energy sector or the defense sector.
Right. We've talked on the show about how vaccines are essentially some sort of a strategic asset. The way South Korea is dealing with the situation there. Is that a right mentality to be?
Absolutely. Governments invest in vaccines like they invest in infrastructure, healthcare systems, or defense systems.
I love the points that you brought up. We're going to take a quick break. WHO 也就是世界卫生组织说，目前的新病毒当中有15种会对人类带来极大的威胁，但目前只有3种病毒其实是有疫苗的，这包括像是 COVID。那 Mr. Bergstedt 他说 ，Moderna 会在2025年之前对15种病毒来进行疫苗研发。广告回来，我们还要听一下他对于如果今天有您自己或者是您身边的亲朋好友，对于疫苗还有存疑的，我会想要请他来回答你的问题。我们马上回来。好，欢迎回到全球聊天室。不止台湾的防疫政策放宽了，日本的也是。之前是只开放团课，但现在呢，早就已经开放让大家自由行了。当然，大好消息，但有个隐忧，就是流感病毒也在蠢蠢欲动。像是南半球的澳洲就出现了流感大爆发。那眼见澳洲的流感疫情这么严重，要是之后 COVID 跟流感包夹，那就惨了。所以呢，不断涌入观光客的日本政府也趕緊推動施打次世代新冠疫苗，並且縮短了2劑加強劑之間的間隔時間。
今回インフルエンザが多分来るでしょう。そういうことを考慮しながら今のうちから一般市民にどんなことをお願いするかも含めて。
随着跨年活动跟新年假期即将到来，大量人潮流动的隐忧，让日本新冠顾问委员会主席尾生茂现身呼吁，政府应该尽快拟定冬季的防疫对策。今年澳洲的流感病例突破5年新高，担心这场流感噩梦就要登陆北半球。日本厚生劳动省宣布，今年将分发3520万瓶疫苗，预估可以施打至少7000万剂，是史上最多的一次。
今後連休による接触機会の増加等がありますので、感染状況に与える影響は注意が必要としております。
除了流感疫苗之外，为了迎战旅游复苏，日本航空公司纷纷卯起来为机组人员施打 COVID-19 的次世代疫苗，而且打头阵的就是台湾游客最熟悉的关西机场。
なるべく早く接種をすることで、より安心につながると思ったので、今回接種をいたしました。
職場で私も4回すべて受けてるんですけれども、前後のフライト タイミングよく設定してくれますので、今日初日ということになりました。
趁着现在 COVID-19 确诊人数下降，医疗量能得以喘息，厚生劳动省将接种间隔从5个月缩短为3个月，就是要鼓励民众加紧施打次世代疫苗，全力冲刺覆盖率。
BA.5 そうですねがちょっとこう増えてきたときにそれに対応するワクチンが出るって聞いたので、ぜひ私もそれを打たせていただけたらいいなと思って BA.5 まで待ちました。
日本政府听防疫，就是不要让今年8月医疗量能崩溃的噩梦再度重演。
As we just saw in the video, governments around the world are encouraging people to get vaccinated because apart from washing our hands and putting on face masks, vaccination really is the only way out of this pandemic. We have to vaccinate our way out of it. Yet there are holdouts everywhere, anti-vaxxers as they're known, who are staunchly opposed to vaccination. And I'm gonna be honest here, this next question is very personal. Someone that I love deeply, someone in my family, is entirely against vaccination. When I told her that I was getting my second booster literally yesterday morning, she was incredibly upset and told me that these vaccines they haven't had enough tests, and because the virus is constantly mutating, which we know and agree on, there's no point getting a shot anyway, because they're always playing catch up. And if you do get a shot, she said, that vaccine will wreak havoc in your immune system. And it's harmful, so don't do it. That's the message that I received before I literally got my shot. Actually, after. But what do you say to that?
So, in my experience in working in the vaccine industry, and I probably have sort of like 5 years of experience working in vaccines now, I tend to see 3 groups of people. The one group of people are people that are routinely getting vaccinated. My parents-in-law, for example, right? They get their flu vaccine, they get their pneumococcal vaccine, they get their COVID vaccine, and they get, so they are people that really understand the value of vaccine. Particularly, they are aged people, they have they're immune compromised, so they are really at risk. And my recommendation is if you're in that group of people, please discuss the role of vaccines with your healthcare professional. Right? That's group number 1. That's the easiest group. And then you have another extreme group of people who, no matter what the science says, no matter which scientific leader in which country stands up and advocates or presents the data for vaccination, they will say, no, thank you. And that is their right.
Of course.
But then there are a number of people, who are in between, and I would say they are legitimately hesitant people. Why do I say they're legitimately hesitant? It's because they have real questions. It may be a mom or a dad with a child who says, listen, I have some questions around the efficacy, safety, tolerability of this vaccine. It may be somebody who's in the 50 to 60 year age group and says, listen, I'm going to get this vaccine, but how long will it last? Right? These are great questions, right? And I think it's up to the industry, it's up to the Ministry of Health, it's up to the CDC, it's up to these credible institutions to provide information that helps to build confidence. Because you can overcome hesitancy if you present the right data, the right information from credible sources, and you can provide authentic information. Unfortunately, we are in a crazy world of where it's like Dr. Facebook or Dr. Google or Dr. TikTok has now become nearly more, credible in a bizarre kind of convoluted way than the scientific leader in your country. So we are working very, very hard to make information available to help instill confidence.
One of my last few questions is, what do you think are the lessons we can draw from this pandemic to prevent another one just like it? Because, apart from maybe it's not a very good idea to eat bats for dinner. I mean, we know that now. Are there other lessons that can be drawn?
I think what's important to understand, and it sort of comes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago about the role of vaccines and how vaccines are seen. One has to firstly remember that vaccines is population health, right? It's not like you are targeting just this only group of people. Vaccines work when as many people get vaccinated as possible in order to create this herd immunity or this herd defense.
Right.
In order to achieve that, that's not just the Ministry of Health. That's not just the Taiwan FDA or the Taiwan CDC. You need industry to collaborate. You need logistics and distribution to work together. You need people that are actually, you need a very strong healthcare provider network, be it hospital level, clinical level, GP office level, right, depending on the healthcare system. So it really does take us like a village, as they say, or a coalition of stakeholders and partners. Where the world was exposed in 2020 was that all of those linkages of the chain were not in place. And we had some countries that were able to get vaccines, and unfortunately, we had many other countries that never got vaccines or got vaccines very, very late. We should learn from that, because I think if you speak to scientific leaders, they say we sort of like get a pandemic every 20 years or so. And the Asia-Pacific region is renowned for that, because you've had SARS, you've had H1N1, right? You've now been dealing with COVID-19. So this is a region, part of the world which kind of gets these. You've had avian flu, so this is a region of the world that kind of sees these things come and go quite frequently. Unfortunately.
Exactly. I like what you said there. It takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to stop a pandemic. In this case, the village being planet Earth. 感谢莫德纳的全球资深副总裁 Patrick Bergstedt 今天来到我们全球聊天室，接受我们的专访。我们当然也非常期待 Moderna 会不断的深化跟台湾的合作，以及将来有更多疫苗的问世，让更多疾病都不再对人类构成威胁。这边我们先休息一下，广告回来我们要来看一下治疗阿兹海默症又有新药了，它的成效很明显 ，but 它的副作用也蛮大的。马上回来。回到全球聊天室，美国生技公司百健跟日本药厂卫彩共同开发的抗阿兹海默新药，11月29号公布了实验结果，患者的认知衰退减少了将近30%，这是一个非常惊人的差异。不过呢，在1800名的受测者当中，有14%的人出现了微量的脑出血，其中5个人严重出血，甚至有2名患者疑似是因此丧命了。那所以毫无疑问，这个新药它的副作用真的很可怕。不过因为过去这10几年、几十年来，治疗阿兹海默症相关实验其实都是宣告失败的。所以这款药物即便它有副作用，还是让大家对它寄予厚望。而这2家药厂的股价也从9月份开始就大喷发，百健呢已经上涨了超过60%，卫彩也涨了将近50%之多。
I have Alzheimer's disease.
电影讲述一名教授罹患阿兹海默症，渐渐从学识渊博到什么也记不得，让观众深刻体悟阿兹海默的可怕。不过先前美国生技公司百健和日本药厂卫彩共同开发抗阿兹海默药物 lecanemab， 原本以为可以为阿兹海默患者带来希望，但最近一项实验报告的数据却显示 lecanemab 可能对人体造成危险性的副作用。
Because it does look like there were several deaths in the 18-month study, including 2 patients who did receive the treatment. Were they drug-related?
临床报告指出，共有1800名阿兹海默初期患者接受为期18个月的临床试验，其中超过12%的人有脑肿胀的现象，14%的人发生脑内微量出血，5人大量脑出血，另外还有2人死亡，让人对 lecanemab 产生质疑。
We actually showed that for individuals on anticoagulants in this trial, they do benefit in terms of their cognition and function in a very meaningful way in this clinical trial.
卫彩执行长张伟文直言，不该将死因完全归咎 lecanemab， 并且强调，如果对照临床失智评估量表 ，lecanemab 确实可以有效降低27%的认知衰退能力。
And now we're up again because the actual trial results themselves, again, we're getting a closer look.
Exactly.
今年9月 lecanemab 实验初步数据公布后，百健和卫彩就一路飙涨，其中百健的涨幅更是超过50%。只是 lecanemab 药价昂贵，有能力负担的患者少之又少。如今又爆出药物具有危险副作用，最终是否能成功上市，仍是个未知数。镜新闻林梅杰、蔡琼满报道。
高通膨时代，很多人要勒紧裤腰，要缩衣节食。不过广告回来，我们要带您来看，为什么商人发现女性的消费市场还是有很多的潜力，有很大的开发空间？马上回来。好，我们来看到一般的运动酒吧，它的电视墙放的都是以男性为主的比赛。不过，美国波特兰有一间运动酒吧，它放的清一色都是女子的体育赛事。为什么呢？其实很简单，因为这间酒吧的老板他已经受不了说，在跟朋友畅饮的时候，想看的比赛都没得看，于是干脆就给他自己开一间。而且，与其说这是一间运动酒 bar， 不如说这是一件运动 bra。
到运动酒吧放松一下，发现客人清一色是女生，不看 C 罗、梅西，而是看女子足球明星。眼尖的你，搞不好也发现
They even misspelled the word bar.
你没看错，这家酒吧的 bar 就是拼成胸罩 bra。
Founder owner of the sports bra.
谈到自己的谐音梗，老板笑得很开心。本身是重度女子篮球迷的他，说4年前到某间运动酒吧，当时全美大学女篮赛事明明打得火热，电视墙上却没一台在播，希望店家转台，还被要求只能开静音。
I think right then it kind of crystallized this idea that I had gotten so accustomed to watching women's sports in a public venue, compromised.
想看女子运动赛事错了吗？出于这个单纯的想法，这家运动胸罩酒吧今年4月在波特兰开幕，成了全美唯一专放女子赛事的酒吧，独特风格也马上广受好评。
You don't see that anywhere else.
Stanford against Oregon.
The food, by the way, was really good.
开店资金除了自身积蓄外，老板也透过网络募资，新颖的想法成功募得好几万美元。客人这句回馈让他再辛苦都觉得值得。
People who want to hug me and say, "I've been waiting my whole life for this."
波特兰近年动乱频传，谈到酒吧未来展望，老板不改幽默本色。
So Nguyen wants the sports bra to be uplifting.
期盼性别意识更上一层楼。老板说，他的下一步希望能发展为连锁品牌，让他的理念在其他城市多点开花，照顾美国更多女子运动赛事粉丝。经新闻谢子健、戴润报道。
感谢您收看今天的全球聊天室。每一个礼拜，我们都为您搜集来自全球的焦点话题。我是军人王显瑜，我们下次见。